Hi everybody, it's Andy, and welcome again to my office in Los Altos, California. I'm an attorney licensed to practice law in California as well as New York. This video is going to be a little bit different, I guess. I am not going to go over a specific like contract law concept or a family law concept. Most of my other videos do kind of take that format. This video is going to basically go over a lesson in, I guess, civics or government or social studies. Kind of depends on what your particular school, high school, for example, called it. And the question I'm going to answer is, how is the California state court system organized? Now, I'm going to talk specifically about California, but if you don't live in California or if you live outside the United States generally, if you're trying to, I guess, understand court systems in the United States, this idea that I'm going to go over about a three-tier system is actually very helpful. As I'll explain, I guess, kind of towards the end of the video, the idea is the same kind of throughout the United States, but each implementation is slightly different. So hopefully that makes sense. Go ahead and share, comment, like, subscribe, all that nice stuff. And if you hang out with me right now, I will actually go over how the California courts are organized. When we talk about the California state courts, it's helpful to imagine it as a system of three levels, level 1, 2, and 3. And the levels escalate, meaning that, if your case doesn't resolve at level 1, you might be able to appeal it to level 2, and then if it doesn't resolve there, you might be able to appeal it to level 3. Appeals in California are actually very complicated. There are a lot of rules, a lot of procedures about them. A lot of times people will, for some reason, which I don't understand, think that they can just appeal just because they lost. In general, you cannot appeal just because you are unhappy or you lost. As you can probably imagine, no case would ever finish if people could just keep on appealing. So anyway, the idea though of a three-level court system, if you can understand that, that's actually tremendously helpful because a lot of court systems in the United States work that same way. The federal system does, I think with maybe one exception, all state court systems work that way also. So anyway, all of that said then, in California, the level 1 court is called the Superior Court, and those are going to be located in each county in California. California has 58 counties, so there's 58 Superior Courts. The way that you refer to it is going to be, Superior Court of the State of California, County of Santa Cruz, County of Santa Barbara, County of Los Angeles, etc. The Superior Court in each county has has authority to hear a wide variety of cases. I just put down two of them, family law and disputes over contracts. However, if you've ever been involved in a probate case, a personal injury case, medical malpractice case, product defect case, all of those can be heard in Superior Court. There are certain types of cases that cannot be heard in Superior Court. Those are going to be like, bankruptcy cases, immigration cases, stuff that is by law specifically reserved for certain courts. Superior courts cannot hear those cases. So all of that said, a lot of you are probably thinking that you've never been to Superior Court before. That may not be true if you've ever been to small claims court, for example, to sue over, a customer, let's say, who won't pay your bill. If you've ever been to traffic court to fight a ticket, all of that is in the Superior Court also, except the terminology is just different. Like, they refer to it as small claims, but it's the small claims division of the Superior Court. So depending on the type of case, you might also be able to do an appeal within the Superior Court, and that's what the word appellate there means. The type of case that I'm most familiar with, that gets appealed within the Superior Court is landlord-tenant cases. So typically, a tenant who, tried to fight their eviction and they lost, and they didn't feel like, they should have lost, so they appeal, and that appeal is done within the Superior Court. In general, however, if you appeal a case from the Superior Court, it goes to the appellate courts or the courts of appeal. And so that's the level 2 courts in our three-level system. There are 58 Superior Courts, as I said a moment ago, but there are only 6 appellate courts, and those are in the 6 California cities that I have listed out here. And depending on which of the 58 counties you're appealing from, you will go to one of the 6 appellate courts. Generally, it's basically based on geography. So if you're in Northern California and you appeal to the level 2 courts, you're probably not going to go to San Diego, probably going to go to San Francisco, Sacramento, etc. So, and like I said, the level 2 appellate courts, their job is to hear most appeals from the superior courts that are not handled by the appellate divisions of each superior court. So anyway, the level 3 court then, there's only one of those, and it's the California Supreme Court. And a lot of times people are surprised to hear that the Supreme Court of California is actually not in the state capital of Sacramento. So the California Supreme Court is actually in San Francisco, and the Supreme Court's job is to hear appeals from the appellate courts. There are certain other duties that the California Supreme Court has, but the primary one, I think, is the appellate courts, to hear appeals from the appellate courts. The last point I want to bring up about the California Supreme Court is that it is the final decider, the final authority, the final arbiter on issues of California state law. This is probably a little too complicated to explain, but depending on how a case is argued and what claims are made, the law that governs might be federal, it might be federal only, it might be state only, or it could be a combination of both. If it is state only, like if it's state law only, and you appeal to the California Supreme Court and you lose, that's it. There is no appeal on state law issues above the California Supreme Court. So sometimes people are sort of surprised by that, because sometimes you can appeal from the California Supreme Court to the federal system, but sometimes not. So anyway, moving on then. I said, I think a moment ago, that if you can understand the whole idea of a 3-level court system, that's actually tremendously helpful, because this same 3-level system occurs in nearly all states in the U.S. I think there's one state that might actually only have 2, but don't quote me on that. The one kind of caveat here, I guess, is that even though the 3-level system might be in nearly all states, the naming convention, the terminology is different. So to give you an example, the level 1 court in California, as we saw from the previous slide, is called the Superior Court. The level 1 court in the New York system is called the Supreme Court. The functions are the same, like, they are the trial courts of general jurisdiction in the state system in each state. However, the terminology is just different, which is a little confusing for lawyers like me who are California and New York admitted, mainly because, the level 1 court in New York, the Supreme Court, is the level 3 court in California. So the terminology sometimes can get a little confusing. And like I said, also, the federal courts have a very similar 3-level system. You might have heard U.S. District Court, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and of course, I think everyone's heard of the U.S. Supreme Court. So a lot of stuff that I have talked about so far may not apply to other courts, and I'm specifically mentioning specialized courts that are within government agencies. Those are, technically they're called administrative courts. So the thing is, you might have them within the Social Security Administration, the Department of Motor Vehicles. If you have a case where you've applied for unemployment benefits in California, through EDD, for example, and you're denied, you have courts for that. Those courts in general will not have the 3-level system that I'm talking about. However, they may have appeals, possibly to courts that do have 3-level systems. So in Social Security, for example, they have a system within the administration. However, if you exhaust all of those appeals, you can appeal to the federal court system where the 3-level idea does apply. So hopefully all of that made sense. The basic idea is that, there is a 3-level system in most court systems in the United States, and it's helpful to kind of know that, you can appeal from one to the other, but you can't skip over, I guess, is the idea. And of course, the naming convention in each state or jurisdiction can sometimes be different. So hopefully all of that made sense. Go ahead and subscribe, share, comment, like, etc. And I will talk to you guys next time. Thanks.